Let me ask you something. What would you do if you woke up tomorrow, checked your bank account, and saw $10,000 sitting there? Not a loan, not debt, just yours. Take a second. Really think about it. Because here's what's wild. For a lot of people, that question alone triggers anxiety, not excitement. Anxiety. Because they've never seen that number. It feels fake. It feels temporary. Like it would disappear before they figured out what to do with it. And that reaction? That tells you everything. Right now, over half of Americans can't cover a $1,000 emergency without going into debt. Half. In one of the wealthiest countries in the world. So when we talk about $10,000, we're not talking about being rich. We're not talking about a yacht or a vacation home. We're talking about a threshold. A line in the sand. The point where something fundamental shifts. Not just in your bank account, but in your brain. Because I've talked to people who crossed that number. I've read the research. And I can tell you, the people who've been on both sides of $10,000 describe it almost the same way every single time. They say it felt like putting on glasses for the first time. Everything looked tagged. Siertersaur. Taikri rechamar, aba wadisianmel. Be dawar, bedsammam. Plateriboro, wirezo, buttergelaitriu. But suddenly they could see. Today we're going to talk about exactly what changes, and more importantly, why it changes when you hit that number. And I promise you, by the end of this video, you're going to look at $10,000 very differently than you did 5 minutes ago. Let's start with the thing nobody really talks about when they give financial advice. Fear. When you have less than $1,000 in your account, or worse, when you're living paycheck to paycheck, every single decision you make is filtered through one question. Can I afford to get this wrong? Think about what that does to you over time. You don't quit the job that's making you miserable, because what if the next one doesn't work out? You don't go to the doctor when something feels off, because what if it's serious and you can't cover the bill? You don't take the weekend trip with your friends, because what if your car breaks down next week and you need that $200? You are not making choices. You are making calculations. And every calculation is about survival. There's actually a name for this in behavioral economics. Harvard professor Sendil Mullainathan and Princeton professor Eldar Shafir wrote a whole book about it called Scarcity. And what they found is that when people are operating under financial scarcity, it literally consumes cognitive bandwidth. Your brain is so busy managing the fear of not having enough that you have less mental capacity left over for everything else, for creativity, for long-term thinking, for making good decisions. They called it the bandwidth tax. You're basically running your entire life on a phone that's permanently at 20% battery. You can do it. People do it every day. But you're always one bad day away from shutting down completely. Now, what happens at $10,000? The fear doesn't disappear. But for the first time, it loosens its grip. Because $10,000, depending on where you live and how you spend, is roughly 3 to 6 months of basic living expenses. That's called a runway. And runway changes everything. When you have runway, you stop making decisions out of desperation. You start making decisions out of intention. That is not a small difference. That is the difference between a life you're reacting to and a life you're designing. One of the most powerful things money can buy isn't stuff. No, it's options. And $10,000 is often the first time in a person's life that they feel like they actually have them. Here's something I want you to really sit with. Before you have savings, your time is not really yours. I know that sounds dramatic, but follow me here. When you have no financial buffer, you cannot afford to be selective. You take the job that's available, not the job that's right. You pick up the extra shift even though you're exhausted, because that $80 matters. You stay in the situation that's not working because leaving feels like stepping off a cliff. Your time is being rented out to whoever will pay for it, continuously, with no end in sight. $10,000 changes that equation. Suddenly you have what I'd call negotiating power, not just at work, but in life. You can walk into a job negotiation and actually be willing to walk away if the offer isn't right, because you have 3 months of expenses sitting in your account. Do you know how differently you come across when you're not negotiating from desperation? Hiring managers can feel it. People can feel it. You can take 2 weeks between jobs to actually think about what you want to do next, instead of accepting the first offer you get because rent is due in 9 days. You can say no to a client who disrespects you. You can leave a relationship that isn't serving you. You can enroll in that certification course instead of picking up a second job to cover a gap. None of these things are possible without a buffer. And none of them are possible with a buffer if you don't use it strategically. This is why financial advisors talk so much about the emergency fund. Not because an emergency fund is exciting, it's not. You're not investing it. It's not growing fast. But it is buying you something that no investment can. The freedom to make better decisions. Think about the compounding effect of that alone. If $10,000 allows you to negotiate a job offer that pays $8,000 more per year, you just turned that $10,000 into a return that almost no stock market can match. If it allows you to leave a toxic situation 6 months earlier than you would have, what's that worth to your health, your relationships, your output? Time is the one resource you cannot make more of. And $10,000 used wisely gives you more control over yours. Okay, this one's a little uncomfortable to talk about. But it's real, and I'd be doing you a disservice if I skipped it. When you cross the $10,000 mark, your social life changes. Not always in the ways you'd expect. And not always in ways that feel good. Here's the first thing that happens. A lot of the performance disappears. When you're broke or nearly broke, there's often this exhausting social theater you have to maintain. Pretending you're fine when you're stressed. Splitting a dinner bill that you genuinely cannot afford because you don't want to be that person. Saying yes to things because saying no feels like admitting something you're ashamed of. When you have a cushion, that weight lifts. You stop performing financial comfort and start actually having it. And, weirdly, that makes you more genuine, more relaxed, more present. People notice, even if they don't know why. But here's where it gets complicated. Some of your relationships will quietly shift in ways that catch you off guard. Family members might start asking to borrow money. Friends who are still in the scarcity mindset might start to pull away from you or say things that sting a little. You might find yourself less patient with conversations about why so-and-so can't get it together financially, because you've just proven that it's possible to make progress, even on an ordinary income. And then there's something even subtler. You start noticing who around you is building something and who around you is just getting by. Not in a judgmental way. But when your mindset starts to shift, you naturally start gravitating toward people who are thinking about the future. Jim Rohn famously said you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. I don't know if the math is exactly that clean, but there's something true in it. $10,000 doesn't change your friends, but it often starts to reveal who was really aligned with where you're going and who was just comfortable with where you were. This might be the single biggest mindset shift that happens at $10,000, and it's one that most people can't even articulate when it's happening to them. Chati soai chati selst you're away right of toa. You start thinking like an investor instead of a consumer. Before you have savings, every financial decision is essentially the same question. Can I afford this? That's it. That's the whole analysis. Can I cover it? Yes or no? After $10,000, the question changes. It becomes, what does this do for me? Does this purchase save me time? Does it help me earn more? Does it protect something I already have? Or is it just consumption? Let me give you a concrete example. Before $10,000, spending $500 on a professional certification course feels irresponsible. That's rent money. That's groceries. That's a car payment. You can't think about ROI because you're thinking about survival. After $10,000, that same $500 course looks completely different. You run the math. If this certification gets me a $5,000 raise, I just made a 10x return. That's not spending. That's investing in yourself. Bakari Waf. And the only reason you can see it that way is because you have enough breathing room to think past next month. This is why wealthy people often say things like, I don't buy liabilities, I buy assets. It sounds like a cliche until you understand the psychology behind it. When you're in scarcity, you can't think in assets and liabilities. When you have a buffer, suddenly everything gets classified. Your brain starts asking, is this thing going to work for me, or am I going to work for it? A car that gets you to a better paying job. Asset. A car that costs you $700 a month and depreciates the second you drive it off the lot. Liability. A home office setup that lets you take on freelance work. Asset. A bigger TV. Be honest with yourself. I'm not saying never enjoy things. That's not the point. The point is that $10,000 is often the first time people develop discernment, the ability to tell the difference between a purchase that moves you forward and one that just feels good in the moment. And once you develop that discernment, you cannot turn it off. It changes how you see every dollar you spend for the rest of your life. Here's a question that sounds simple, but has a really complicated answer. Why do rich people keep getting richer? The obvious answer is because they have money to invest. And yes, that's part of it. But there's something deeper going on. Rich people can afford to fail. Think about what that means. When you're living paycheck to paycheck, any risk you take has a potentially catastrophic downside. You want to start a side business? What if it doesn't make money for 6 months? You want to invest? What if the market drops 20% right after you buy? You want to leave your stable job and try something new. What if it takes a year to find your footing? For someone without savings, any one of those scenarios can spiral into a genuine crisis. And your brain knows that. So it does what brains do. It protects you by keeping you still, by making risk feel terrifying, by making the status quo feel safer than it really is. Chaturi sad trio stau prom. Chaturi trio. Chartering free. Chatrio changes the math. Suddenly, a failed side hustle doesn't mean you can't pay rent. It means you spent some time and maybe a few $100s learning something. Suddenly, a market dip isn't a disaster. It's a buying opportunity. Suddenly, taking a chance on yourself doesn't feel like jumping off a cliff. It feels like stepping off a curb. This is not theoretical. Study after study on entrepreneurship shows that people who start businesses are not actually more risk-tolerant by personality. They're more financially buffered. The majority of successful founders come from households with some degree of financial safety net. Not because rich kids are smarter or more talented, but because they can afford to try things, fail, adjust, and try again. $10,000 is the beginning of that buffer. It's not enough to retire on. It's not enough to invest your way to wealth on its own. But it is enough to start taking the kinds of smart, calculated risks that are the actual engine of financial growth. The people who build real wealth are not lucky. They're people who had enough of a cushion to take swings. $10,000 is your first real chance to start swinging. All right, I need to pump the brakes here for a second. Because everything I've told you so far is true, but only if you actually keep the $10,000. And a shocking number of people don't. There's a phenomenon called lifestyle creep, also called lifestyle inflation, and it is the silent killer of financial progress. Here's how it works. You hit a milestone. You get a raise, you build up your savings, you pay off a debt. And, almost automatically, your spending expands to match your new income level. You upgrade your apartment. You start eating out more. You get the newer car because, hey, you've earned it. You subscribe to more things. You buy the nicer version of everything because you've worked hard and you deserve nice things. And none of those individual decisions feels wrong. Because they don't feel like decisions. They feel like upgrades. They feel like you're finally living the way you always deserve to live. But here's the math. If every time you earn more, you spend more, your savings rate never improves. You make more money, but you're not building more wealth. You're just running the treadmill faster. I've talked to people who've hit $10,000 in savings 3 separate times. And every single time, something came up. A vacation, a new set of furniture, I deserve this moment. And it was gone. Not because they were irresponsible people, but because nobody ever taught them that the whole point of building up a cushion is to leave it alone and let it compound. $10,000 only changes your life if you let it do its job. Its job is not to be spent. Its job is to be the foundation that allows you to take better risks, make better decisions, and eventually grow into something bigger. The moment you treat your emergency fund as a spending account, you reset the clock. You go back to scarcity mode. And every mental shift we talked about today, the reduced fear, the expanded risk tolerance, the investor mindset, it all goes with it. So here's the rule. Build it, protect it, then build beyond it. The $10,000 is not the destination. It's the launch pad. So let's bring this all the way back. $10,000 is not a magic number. It's not some secret threshold that the wealthy have been hiding from the rest of us. It's not even that much money in the grand scheme of things. But it represents something that most people never get to experience. The first time your money is working for you instead of the other way around. When you cross that line, your relationship with fear changes. You stop making decisions out of desperation and start making them out of intention. You gain negotiating power over your time. Your social dynamics shift in ways that can be uncomfortable, but ultimately clarifying. You develop an investor's eye. You start seeing assets instead of just expenses. Your risk tolerance expands, and for the first time, you can actually start taking the kinds of swings that build real financial momentum. And if you protect it from lifestyle creep, that $10,000 becomes the foundation for $25,000, then $50,000, then something that genuinely changes the trajectory of your family. I want to leave you with one question. Not a rhetorical one. I actually want you to sit with this. What would change for you at $10,000? Not what would you buy. What would you do? What decision are you currently unable to make because you don't have that buffer? What risk are you not taking? What conversation are you avoiding? What version of yourself are you postponing? Because that answer, that's your real reason to build it. Drop it in the comments. I read them. And if this video made you think differently about money, even a little, share it with someone who needs to hear it. I'll see you in the next one.